and very, very able head of the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, I just want to talk on our resolution, which we are going to get a vote on. Lord knows if we couldn't have even gotten a vote on that. The idea that an American ambassador who served us so well should be brought before Putin and his minions to be questioned when there is no charge against him, no issue against him. It's not like the 12 Russians who were indicted for trying to interfere with our elections. There's not even an analogy. There's not even an evenness. And President Trump amazingly called this an incredible offer. Our president is saying that one of our ambassadors to be hauled before an authoritarian regime that twists the truth, that lies at will, that even seems to kill people they want to with poison in other countries. And that's an incredible offer? Well, this resolution is a fine resolution. It'll pass. It doesn't undo what just happened. It doesn't make up for the fact that our colleagues are afraid to take real action, and even a resolution that posits action in terms of the major misdeeds at Helsinki. But at the very least, we're protecting the integrity of men and women who serve us. Because if today it's the ambassador, tomorrow it could be somebody in the military or somebody in the intelligence agencies or elsewhere. So this resolution is very clear. What it says is what President Trump, when President Trump called Putin's offer an incredible offer, he was incredibly wrong. No president can put one of our fine servants who've worked hard, in this case, for the diplomatic corps at risk. And this resolution, a bare minimum of what we should be doing here. I'm glad it will be on the floor, and I suspect it will pass, hopefully unanimously. I yield the floor to my colleague from New Jersey.
Madam President.
The Senator from New Jersey.
Madam President, I'm very pleased to join with the distinguished Democratic leader in co-authoring this resolution. Before I speak to it, I do want to speak to the Flake-Coons resolution. I certainly would have supported it, although I believe it's the minimum of what this body should be expressing after what we saw in Helsinki. This is a moment for bipartisanship and for patriotism, because what I saw in Helsinki speaks to the opposite of standing up to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I find it interesting in the majority whip's objection to the resolution coming to a vote that, among other things, he's talking about we should have more sanctions against Russia, which I will speak to shortly. We are in the midst of developing a new strong package of sanctions as it relates to Russia. So I embrace and welcome him to that effort if he seeks to actually see real sanctions against Russia. But, you know, we have sanctions. There are sanctions that passed 98-2 in this institution, passed overwhelmingly in the House of Representatives, forced the president to sign it as a result of overwhelming votes, and yet have not been fulfilled. Sanctions that were largely mandatory but have not been fulfilled. So we could start off by having a robust engagement of the existing sanctions, and I'm not quite sure how we start being tough on Russia. One of the elements of those sanctions was to go after Russia's defense sales of defense weapons, and here we're already looking for waivers. So there's a difference between a country that maybe has a long history of buying Russian military equipment, but the S-400, a new anti-defense system, that's a new version. That's not a legacy issue. So I'm not sure how we're going to tell one country you can buy the S-400, but another country you can't. It doesn't work. That's how sanctions begin to crumble at the end of the day. But I welcome the response that we should be having new sanctions. Now, as it relates to this resolution, it's outrageous that the White House would not instantaneously and firmly dismiss a proposition that Russian prosecutors would come question a former United States ambassador. Again and again, we have seen President Trump take Vladimir Putin's word. And it's unconscionable that this White House would give anything other than a full-throated defense of America's foreign service, like Ambassador Mike McFaul, who served our country with honor and distinction. The reason that Putin doesn't like Mike McFaul is because as our U.S. ambassador, he stood up for democracy, human rights in Russia. He stood up to the Russian regime. He promoted American values and ideals. He spoke truth to power inside of Russia. That's why Putin wants him. Congress shouldn't have to tell America's president to stand up for America's public servants and its diplomatic corps, but apparently we have to. President Trump has repeatedly dismissed Russia's attack in 2016. And he shrugs off the threat it poses today despite all of its intelligence agencies and the Director of National Intelligence just days ago saying there are red blinking lights about Russia's continual engagement and interference in the elections that will take place 110 days from now. This week, he continuously and directly contradicted his own national security advisors and instead embraced the line of Putin and Russian intelligence. Now, I know they've been trying to clean it up, but he's said it so many times the same way he said it in Helsinki. That's what he really believes. That's what he really believes. And now to say something different, wrong time, wrong continent, not too much. He spouted talking points that sound like they're straight from the Kremlin. He's shown a willingness to accede to Putin's request to interrogate Americans, a willingness to accept Putin's denials about Russian interference, a willingness to attack NATO allies like Montenegro, and a willingness to be a supplicant to Putin's views. The president keeps claiming he's been tough on Russia. No, it's Congress that has been tough on Russia by passing the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act with broad and deep bipartisan support. But the White House hasn't taken it seriously. They've ignored a series of mandates in the law. The clear tone and intent coming from the Helsinki summit was one of accommodation, not of pressure. Madam President, I don't see any other way forward other than further congressional action to forcefully call out and address the administration's willful paralysis to Putin's abhorrent behavior. Our efforts to date have been transformative, but just as the administration has been prepared to find ways that allow them to circumvent the law and avoid implementing mandatory provisions of CAATSA, we must be equally prepared to adjust and adapt by closing those loopholes. That's why I will soon introduce comprehensive legislation to increase pressure to actually implement the law and increase pressure on Russia for its aggression against the United States and our allies. Among the considerations we have for this new legislation will be to increase sanctions on Russia's energy sector, to increase sanctions on its cyber sector, to increase pressure on Russia's oligarchs and those who are closest to Putin, and to look at Russia's sovereign debt as a target. We cannot wait to see whether Russia attacks us in the 2018 election. We know that they are in the midst of making that a reality, and we need to ramp up the pressure. We can't afford to wait. And based on this president's behavior, we also need to protect our institutions here at home. That's why we want to include protections for the Office of the Special Counsel. The president has done more to target Bob Mueller than he has to go after Vladimir Putin. And this must stop. This effort must be bipartisan, which is why I look forward to working with Republican colleagues who truly want to see us fight back on Russia, nearly all of whom voted to increase sanctions on Russia last year and place more authority for sanctions alleviation in the hands of Congress. They were right to support such measures in July of 2017, and God knows they would be right now to step up and defend America's interests. It's time to show the American people that we can be patriots, not just partisans. It's time to show the world that we can put our country over party. And it's time that we defend America's democratic institutions against Russia's continued aggression. I look forward to the resolution and its vote and urge everyone to join us in approving it. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor and observe the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.